Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. Um, Happy to have Tharimmune present their story. CEO Randy Milby is going to be sharing with us the opportunity today, and we're excited to learn more. So I'll turn the call over to you, Randy.
Thanks, Nathan. So today we're going to be talking about the immunology for a better tomorrow. We have some immuno-oncology products, which I won't spend a lot of time on, but what the focus today will be on is the autoimmune disease, the side effect, this extreme itching or chronic pruritus that's associated with autoimmune disease, PBC, or primary biliary cholangitis. So we feel this is TH104 as our lead. It's a de-risk clinical program because the active has already been approved for opioid overdose, and that's nalmefene. What we have, which makes it unique, though, is this novel drug delivery technology. It's a buccal delivery system. We've completed the phase 1 studies. The top-line results will be in the second quarter of this year, and we anticipate starting the phase 2 study this year. We've been funded through phase 2. We recently raised at the end of November $11 million. And we're focused right now on this pruritus. And I'll go in a little more detail. There's over 4 million patients with liver disease, but as you can see on this slide, 1.7 suffer from pruritus. And I'll go through some of those diseases with you today. I'm not going to spend much time on the expanded pipeline, which is in the bispecifics and the ADCs, but we will be having an R&D day in the third quarter to give you a lot more detail upon those programs. So the focus is on our clinical asset, TH104. Its mechanism, it works by the MOR and the core, as you can see there on the left-hand side, is the mu opioid receptor and the kappa opioid receptor. It balances these, and it decreases the interleukin 17, which is an inflammatory cytokine. As I mentioned a few minutes ago, we're focused on this pruritus, which is secondary to PBC, or this liver disease. And what's unique is this technology, which the transmucosal film, or this buccal film, envision it like a Listerine strip, but in this case you have nalmefene embedded in it, micronized, which is part of our intellectual property, and therefore you avoid the first pass effect. On the right-hand side, you can see the timeline as far as these are activities that you can hold me accountable for. As I mentioned, we're going to be starting the phase 2 study we're finishing up the phase 1 study. We'll put out the results in the second quarter. We'll be starting the phase 2 study. We'll have the initial readout fourth quarter, first quarter of 2025. I'm not going to spend too much time on the preclinical, as I mentioned a few minutes ago. These will have an R&D day to give you a little more color on our bispecific antibody, which is HER2, HER3 for 3215, a bispecific ADC, and also the TH1940, which is anti-PD-1. But just as a takeaway from this slide, we have the potential to be phase 3 ready in under 12 months. So this is the phase 3 asset. It's TH104. It's chronic pruritus. And this is not the itch that my grandmother used to say, oh, company's coming. This is an unrelenting itch, excruciating itch where patients actually scratch themselves raw. As I mentioned, there's 1.7 million patients that suffer from pruritus and liver disease. Now we're focused on PBC. As you can see on the right-hand side, 75% of these PBC patients have pruritus, but there's other liver diseases where pruritus is also a bad actor. This slide is on nalmefene, and it's an established proof of concept of the limitations of nalmefene. On the right-hand side, you can see that nalmefene actually suppresses pruritus, and this was an oral delivery. Now, nalmefene is available in the United States right now as an IV and intranasal form for opioid overdose, as you can see on the left-hand side. On the right-hand side, this was an oral nalmefene. Nalmefene is available orally in Europe, but you can see that there was a high concentration of drug that was needed to have that 75% reduction in scratching. And this, what you could see on the left again, was that this was discontinued because these patients with PBC already have liver disease, and the oral delivery system, which, as you know, when you take something orally, it gets metabolized initially by the liver. So this would not work for this type of patient. But it did establish for us the proof of concept that nalmefene will work on pruritus. So what is a little more about this proprietary transmucosal film? As you can see on the left-hand side, it's the size of a dime and it adheres to the inner cheek. And it's a transmucosal film. As I mentioned, it's like a Listerine strip, and therefore it actually dissolves and is absorbed within 5 minutes, and you get a peak blood level within 15 minutes. I'll go over the mechanism in a few minutes about this the mu opioid receptor, as well as the kappa opioid receptor, and also the inhibition of interleukin 17. But as you can see on the right-hand side, what this is, the drug is actually embedded into this mucosal film. And as a result of that, you get a fast onset and a higher absorption. The importance of this slide is at the very bottom. What happens here is by giving something transmucosal, by giving as a buccal delivery, you bypass the liver. So you don't have that first pass effect that I talked about in the previous slide where somebody was taking it orally. As a result, the drug is absorbed a lot faster and is distributed to the skin. And therefore, it works to treat these liver diseases because they already have an impaired liver system. As I mentioned, this pruritus is, as patients describe it in the upper left-hand side, it's the worst, most unmanageable itch. And they'll describe it as like bugs crawling underneath their skin. What it is PBC, this liver disease is an orphan disease. There's about 178,000 patients in the United States and same number of patients in Europe. And what unfortunately is 65% of the patients, this nocturnal, they call it nocturnal pruritus, is actually worse at night. And PBC is a chronic disease. And what happens is it's an autoimmune disease where the bile ducts in the liver become dysfunctional. And therefore you have a buildup of bile in the body. A little more on the mechanism. I talked about this mu opioid receptor and the kappa opioid receptor. On the right-hand side, you can see that there's endogenous opioids that build up when you have chronic liver disease. CLD is chronic liver disease. So what happens is the liver is damaged and it starts spewing out, making more opioids. On the left-hand side, you can see in these porotic skin diseases, there becomes an imbalance. So this induction of the itch is an internal. It's an imbalance. There's an overactivation of the mu opioid receptor and the kappa opioid receptor. What nalmefene does in normal skin, it balances the kappa and the mu, and that alleviates the itch. Therefore, this itch cannot be treated topically. This is an internal itch. It's the buildup of the bile acids, as I mentioned in the previous slide. I talked a little bit about interleukin 17. Interleukin 17 is an inflammatory cytokine. You can see that it's on the left, it's overexpressed in PBC patients. And nalmefene shows an anti-interleukin 17 effect. We'll be measuring this when we go into the phase 2 studies. This slide gives you the reason to believe as far as this was ex-US data on a phase 1 study. It wasn't placebo controlled, but it was looking at chronic liver disease, single dose, single center, open label. And what we were looking for here is to see if nalmefene worked in this patient population. As you recall the previous slide, chronic liver disease has an overexpression of opioids. So what we're looking for here is that balancing. And we're using the same scale. It's on that third bullet point down, the worst itch numerical rating scale, which is a 0 to 10. It's a qualitative measurement by the patient of their itch. And as you can see on the last bullet point on the left-hand side, of these 12 patients, there's a mean decline of 33% after a single dose at 24 hours. This gives us confidence that TH104 works in this chronic liver disease patient population. We've also done some additional work in healthy volunteers in phase 1 study. On the left-hand side, as I mentioned, the tablet formulation is available in Europe for alcohol use disorder, not available in the United States. But what we're looking at here is to see what the T1/2, what was the duration of the buccal film versus the tablet. And you can see it matches very nicely. On the right-hand side, we're just trying to see, okay, could you get a higher absorption with a higher pH versus a lower pH? And as you know, you don't want an acidic, putting something acidic in your mouth. And you could see in this example, the dark blue there, we had a higher absorption when the pH was higher, pH of around 7. Therefore, you're not going to get the irritation when you put it inside the cheek. But the most important part of this slide is in the very lower part. And that's when you looked at the safety. When you look at the safety versus what's known right now for the approved nalmefene formulations, you can see there all the side effects, the adverse events were very mild. The most prevalent was somnolence, and somnolence is sleepiness. Therefore, the sleepiness is our intent now is to apply this to the cheek before bedtime. It reaches its peak within 30 minutes. The patient then gets a little more sleepy, and that nocturnal pruritus that I talked about a few minutes ago, you can alleviate that, and the patients can improve their quality of life by having a better night's sleep. On the left, you can see that, as I mentioned, this entire product dissolves within minutes. It's detected in the bloodstream within 15 minutes. And when it completely dissolves, so therefore it adheres, the intellectual property has this film attaches inside the cheek. We recently completed this phase 1 study. This is a simple study. Why is it simple? Because as I mentioned, the FDA has already approved nalmefene for opioid overdose. So their request was simple. Just check the single dose of TH104 versus an IV dose of nalmefene. It's a single dose, single center, open label, two-way crossover. So the group 1 got the single dose of TH104, and then 7 to 11 days later, they got the IV form, and then the group 2 started with the IV, and then they got the single dose TH104 7 to 11 days later. So what are we looking for here? We're looking for the absolute bioavailability of TH104. That's all the FDA wanted to see. The secondary endpoint would be the tolerability compared to the IV form. Now, we've completed this study, and the top line readout, as you can see, is going to be in the second quarter of this year. On the left-hand side, we've projected the revenue for PBC as being $500 to $800 million in the United States, but there are additional indications here. We're focused on pruritus and liver disease, but there are alternative causes of pruritus, which I'll share in a few minutes. One being, as everyone knows, atopic dermatitis. Therefore, the expansion opportunities for us are in other inflammatory purogenic pruritus type diseases, and that would be the baseline at the very bottom right-hand side is this chronic pruritus and liver diseases, which we've shared with you about PBC today, as well as looking at other liver diseases. But pruritus is a bad actor in a number of diseases, including chronic kidney disease. As you can see, moderate to severe pruritus is in chronic kidney disease, and then also the pruritus in atopic dermatitis. Now, we're focused on PBC initially. As I showed you from the data, 75% of those patients have pruritus. I always tell the team we have to get one through the keyhole first. But as you can see from this slide, there's opportunities to do expansion after we get the phase 2 data and as we progress on to advance this technology. A little bit on the competition. We're not treating PBC. We're treating chronic pruritus, which is a result of PBC. On the left-hand side, you can see companies that are in the PBC area. On the right-hand side, you can see those companies that are in the pruritus area. Right now, chronic pruritus in PBC patient is an unmet need. We're focused on that using our novel delivery system, that once-a-day treatment for these patients with PBC patients with pruritus. But as you can see on the previous slide, there's opportunities for growth here. And on the right-hand side, these companies in pruritus are not treating pruritus affiliated with PBC at this point. Here's the execution and the timelines. We closed the $11 million in November of last year. We acquired this asset from Avior, the TH104. We've completed the phase 1 study. We're waiting for the final readout. You'll see that in the second quarter of this year. The CMC is complete. We have a GMP facility. that's been FDA inspected. We're working on the scale up for the phase 2. We have a number of intellectual property patents. The philosophy of the company is to build a picket fence around this. So even though it says issued patents 2, we continue to build on this patent estate. This includes patents around the micronization of the buccal film, as well as the buccal film itself. As I mentioned, this buccal film attaches to the inside of the cheek. There's intellectual property that is affiliated with that, and we'll continue to build that out as we go forward. I'll talk a little now about the leadership team. My background is I'm a pharmacist by training. I was an ROTC person, so I spent 4 years in the military in the Medical Service Corps. And then once I finished my military obligation, I went back for an MBA at Washington University in St. Louis and started my business career at Bristol Myers Squibb in a management development program. I had a lot of cool jobs at DuPont Merck Pharmaceuticals, business development, global marketing, sales, a new product planning, and I did a stint as an equity research analyst at Goldman Sachs. Prior to this, I was the CEO of another publicly traded company called CorMedix. While we were there, we took the company from a market cap of $3 million to $350 million. Shirish and I are the only full-time employees. Shirish Appajoshila, he's my chief operating officer. He's actually been advising me since the formation of the company in 2017. And I finally convinced him to join full-time July of last year. He's got a lot of operational background on the clinical side, as well as on the business development side. And you can see he's led fundraising for a number of companies and worked at a number of big companies, as well as some smaller companies. Everyone on this slide is a board member. Leonard Mazer, many of you have heard of him. Leonard is the CEO of Sidious. I always say that Leonard helps me see around corners because he's founded a number of companies. He's had successful exits with a number of companies, and he's just a resource that I always capitalize upon. Lynn Bowie is a hematologist oncologist for our cancer focus. And then Kelly Anderson is a recent board member. She's a former CFO, and she serves as the head of our audit committee. And with that, I'm open to questions to discuss a little more about Tharimmune and the technology that we have.
Thank you for the presentation, Randy. Exciting opportunity. With the buccal patch, and we've had experience with these in the past, can you talk about the regulatory pathway a little bit as far as getting into the clinic with your phase 2 and then where you go from there, and the time that you may save here compared to a regular, full regimen FDA clinical trial?
So you're right. So this is from a regulatory point of view, it's called the 505(b)(2), and that's because the FDA, as I mentioned, has already approved the active for other indications. And as a result of that, that's why you saw that the phase 1 study that I just shared with you was relatively simple, and therefore it didn't take much time. We finished it in 1 quarter, and then the phase 2 study should not take that much time either, because in this case on the phase 2 design, it'll be in PBC patients. But you can see it's an abbreviated timeline here versus what you would do with a new active.
Has nalmefene ever been in a pruritus setting?
You saw the study that I used with the oral, where it was tested in pruritus in those PBC patients. But here again, there's a lot of problems with the oral delivery. As far as there's a lot of data that gave us the reason to believe that nalmefene had been used in this space, but no one's taking it forward. And the intellectual property that we have is obviously putting the nalmefene on that proprietary buccal delivery system, because nalmefene in and of itself is off patent.
Okay. I don't think you've shared the bioavailability data yet, or have you?
No, so the bioavailability data is not quite done yet. That's why we said it's going to be in the 2nd quarter. We put out a press release early about the phase 1, some of the preliminaries, but we don't have the final data yet. That's something that we'll be putting out in this quarter.
Okay. Can you just talk how this is going to fit into the competitive landscape, these patients?
Right now, so a lot of the drugs, even for PBC, the chronic pruritus, there's nothing out there right now for this. So we kind of envision this initially. We'll do the phase 2 study with PBC patients, but this could be used in combination with other PBC drugs or other drugs for some of the other diseases that I mentioned a few minutes ago. So concomitant therapy. And we'll spend more time getting that more visibility after we have that phase 2 study data.
Excellent. You mentioned IP a little bit. Can you just walk us through the IP setting for your drug since it's been used in other indications? Can you help us?
So there's a couple of aspects to this, and I mentioned the micronization of the nalmefene. It's the way that it's actually goes onto the film, and that micronization helps for that rapid absorption that I mentioned, because it's absorbed, as I've talked about, it's the first pass effect, and therefore it doesn't go through the liver. And you saw on the one slide, there's a higher absorption. The higher absorption is a result of both the composition of matter for the film itself, as well as the micronization, because you want that quick buildup. When I mentioned that's within 5 minutes, it peaks within 30. You want that so you can alleviate that itch. And the intellectual property would continue to build around both the composition of the film itself and also the applications.
So would this be a new chemical entity in a sense, since you're getting composition of matter?
It's not the composition of matter is mainly deals with the film itself.
Okay.
It's not a new chemical entity. It's, in that case, what we're doing is we're spending a lot of time and effort around the design of the film itself and advancing that technology.
Okay. Can you just remind us again what the overall total addressable TAM is for this for your drug as it enters into commercial sale?
So we talked about the initially, as far as if you look at the number of patients with PBC, that was 178,000 patients in the United States, the equivalent number in Europe. We are having some initial discussions with other companies in Europe as far as approaching it from a business development point of view, but we're focused right now internally, focusing getting it through into the United States. And if you look at just PBC, as I mentioned, 178,000 patients, but if you look overall at other liver diseases, it's 1.7 million patients in the United States with liver disease. But here again, as I mentioned, we want to get one through the keyhole first and focus on PBC and then do the expansion. And that expansion could include chronic kidney disease. Obviously, the big elephant in the room would be atopic dermatitis, something too big for us, but that would be something that we'd be interested in partnering with someone. But here again, it's the data. As you well know, we have to get the data. The phase 2 data readout will be critical for us. And all that's within 12 months, because as I mentioned, we'll start the phase 2. We should have top line readout fourth quarter or early first quarter of next year. So we'll have this. It's coming soon as far as getting all this data. And going back to your comment, this is a lot faster than most because it is a 505(b)(2). So the FDA's already seen the drug, they've seen the active, they have plenty of data on it, and that's why the phase 1 study was relatively simplistic.
Yeah, interested to hear about the phase 2 a little bit. What the regimen is, and then how many patients, and
It hasn't been
the
finalized.
duration for these patients for you to get a result back.
Yeah, so it hasn't been finalized yet. What we sent is the Type C meeting request into the FDA, but it's going to be around 30 to 40 patients, a dose escalation study. And this will be in placebo-controlled with patients with PBC.
Okay.
So that's going to be pretty definitive as far as this working in this indication. But the other thing that it's going to show is both on the dosing as well as the pruritus in these patients. So we've identified patients already, or sites already, that have done PBC tests, so they know what the patient population would be. And as you know, a lot of time patient enrollment can be a big problem as far as duration. But in this case, there's registries available for PBC patients, and this includes those patients suffering from this moderate to severe pruritus.
And what will be placebo? Nothing? Will the
Right.
placebo be a sham?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So I know you didn't talk a lot about some of your other assets in the pipeline, but they're very interesting, in particular the bispecific antibodies with the ADCs. As we've seen, some very big deals in that space. So these, as we look into the pipeline, these are nice call options for you guys to have as you get the opportunity to move them in the clinic. ADCs have been one of the hottest spaces in biotech over the last 12 months with, Seagen, Gilead, AbbVie, and the acquisitions that they've made. 40 billion, 20 billion, 10 billion type of numbers. And so is there any particular things you can mention as far as timing
So
with your bispecific antibody and when that may be starting to move up?
yeah, it'll move forward. And right now what we're doing is focusing on TH104. But as you saw on my slide, we're working on the preclinical studies right now for the bispecific and the ADC and IND in 2025. So one thing we put a press release out on Monday, and that shows that John Lambert is part of our scientific advisory board, famous for immunogen background, and also Dr. Von Smider, who's doing a lot of the work with us at the Applied Biomedical Science Institute in San Diego.
Do you have some preclinical data that you could share?
We don't have,
But in the future, do you?
yes, that's
release
one
some
thing
of that?
Nathan, we're
Yeah.
gonna try to do on that R&D day is
Okay.
we'll drill down a lot more in the third quarter about some of the data that we currently have.
Yeah, I think so. That's a good opportunity for investors to get more information on this. When is that day?
We haven't set the
Time?
date yet. What I wanted to do was, once we get feedback from the FDA on our phase 2 design, then we can have Dr. Kremer and speak about the design. And I also mentioned Alan Bonder, who's from Harvard. We'll have them come on and speak about the design of the TH104. But then we're going to have John Lambert and Dr. Smider talk about the bispecifics and the ADCs.
Excellent. Well, we definitely look forward to that. And I think that concludes our time and the questions.
Thank you, Nathan. It's my pleasure.
Thanks a lot, Randy.
Take care.
You too.